General Bircher.
I'm Mark Bircher again. I am running for David Jolly's seat. I was a special election 2 years ago. Probably many in this room don't know I ran in. We're going to do a better job this time. But I'm really happy to be here, and I have 2 minutes.
Well, you know what, you can take 3
Well,
since our speaker is not here yet.
EJ helped me so much during my special election campaign. He'll be here. But thank you for the hospitality and the welcome here. I'm a lawyer. I'm a pilot. I never thought I'd be a politician. I was from the George C. Marshall School of Military Officers. He did not allow his officers to register or vote. Now that's illegal, but he said you can't really fulfill your oath if you support a political candidate when it comes time for the commander-in-chief to give you orders. That's the old school. I was in that. I never thought I'd be here, but then something I didn't know would happen. I had a son. And what became a life where I didn't look to the future past the time I was here turns, if you've ever been a parent, you wear your heart on your sleeve the rest of your life. My son can't reasonably expect to have an opportunity in this country, given the trajectory of our debt trends, our security trends, our encroachments on liberty. I'd like to take the prayer that we had today. That inspired me, because the second most person under Madison's notes, the debates of the convention, was John Locke. He died in 1704, but he said that natural rights do not come from government. It's beyond the power of a government to give you a right that you're born with. So I really appreciate those words. So that natural right that's under assault, tyranny governments will assault every form of structure that a human being can rely on. It's not the government. They'll attack religion, they'll attack education, they'll attack family. Anything that makes you go to the government. Jefferson, I went to high school in Virginia. Jefferson so feared central government educating children, he started the University of Virginia, because when governments tell you what to think, soon it's what to say, and next it's what to do. Very dangerous trend, in my opinion, in this country. A frustration for me is I see the Republican Party moving to the left. We can see that in the omnibus, we can see that over and over, which makes the Democrats move further left to distinguish themselves. So the consequence among us voters is, do I want big government with the Republicans or bigger government with the Democrats? Those are our choices now. I'm trying to bring that back to know the Constitution is something that's supposed to define the limits of the discretion of politicians. Your oath to it is supposed to mean something. I know many in this room took that oath. It's the same oath that all officers, military and civilian, take. I want to get that back front and center, that it actually does mean something when you invent the powers not in the Constitution. So, you know, my job that I'm seeking is called representative. The most important thing in a representative is to listen. God gave us 2 eyes and 2 ears, and one way to speak, probably for a reason, and that is to be listening more. So I'll use whatever time Ms. Gale graciously gives me to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Question.
If you're going to ask the question, would you stand up so we can all hear, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aerospace mechanic engineer. I live here in Tennessee. I design stuff, so common, stuff command. Could you perhaps give some comments on the new naval vessels that were allegedly intercepted by the Iranians, there's a school of thought that that's just a cover story, and as a congressman, what would you urge the president to do under those circumstances?
It's a great question. It's a really important question for me. With the blessings the American people gave me, I went into the military for the minimum amount of time. For the consideration of an education, going to flight school, I was indebted for 3.5 years of service. What I didn't know is you can fall in love with a lot of things. I ended up staying for 38 years, total service. But that question, I'll answer it this way. As long as all we know is what media tells us, and it can be any subject, it can be the subject you meant or anything else, we're limited in our ability to understand and to act. The answer is to get inside the walls of the castle, get all the information, and then foment a policy from that. Right now, I'd be guessing as what I think everybody's guessing. If that's a black operation or some cover story, that belongs in a room in a skiff with, if everybody knows what a skiff is, so that we can really get it out. If I knew, I probably wouldn't say. But the truth is, I don't know. I sure would like to, and if I can get myself to Congress, and get on some of those committees, I can give you a better answer. But that's the honest truth. I don't know. And how many of us now have Channel 6 and 9 come up and ask an American who reads a newspaper what we should do somewhere? It's almost ludicrous. You don't have the information for something like that. My last 5 years in the military, I was on active duty most of the time. I have a top secret SCI clearance, which you know what that is. And I can tell you, it doesn't get easier when you get the real facts of any circumstance. And if everybody's ever studied stuff like Pearl Harbor, you saw the confusion there. We still don't know what happened there. But getting the best information you have is key, and all I know is what media says. So I'm dubious on anything media tells me. Not just issues like that, really everything. But I know that's not an answer, but it's the honest answer.
Eileen, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Spending so much time in the military and everything, do you have any ideas or any plans to help revamp the VA and help solve some of their problems?
Oh, of course, great question. And that's not down Main Street for me, that's down the center of Main Street for me. But let's examine the Constitution again, because I actually believe in that, and I don't mean to sign Trump, but one of the enumerated powers to the federal government, there's 4 major ones: print money, common defense, foreign policy, and the post office. Article 1, Section 8, raise and support armies. That is a federal government responsibility, period. So that tells me that's on the top of my inbox for whatever I need, because so many things will happen in an unbelievably poor way if the VA isn't functioning the way it should. I mean, that's a chip shot for a guy like me, and anybody that's been in this room, this war uniform, or any citizen really knows that. So the VA, enumerated power, no excuses. Frankly, I'm not jumping on everything I hear, because I know personally the dedicated men and women over there. Almost going back to the gentleman in the back, we have to get to the facts and know. What I see when I go to the VA, for the young combat, hardcore wounded kids, I'm pretty impressed. The ones that just come out of the field, the ones I served with that have all the injuries. Where it starts to attenuate is when it leads back to, you know, the waiting list, and you know the story I do, and I need to dig into that and find out why. Is it underfunded? Are we not? I'll be honest, most of the veterans I know don't go to the VA if they have another choice. Why is that? You know, that kind of says something to me. You know, market forces are working there. So, but of course, for a guy like me, you know what the answer is going to be before you asked it. But I appreciate you asking it. Next time you have to come and I'll give you more
38
questions.
years might be done with it, I don't know.
Anything else that on your mind? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Major J. Hebert, U.S. Army retired.
Yes, I
Just last
just
January.
introduced.
Thank you for your service.
And you, sir.
And we really do appreciate all the sacrifice that you and your family have made on behalf of the defense of our nation. I have a question for you. I don't want to put you on the spot,
Put me on the spot. I'm looking for a job.
but I want to ask this question. If elected to Congress, one of the, listening to the sound clip of the president yesterday said that ISIS, what I consider just be Islamic State, is not existential to our existence. However, I feel that Islam is a threat to our existence in the long term. And the reporter actually asked him, but maybe not to your lifetime, but what about your daughter's lifetime and so on. A lot of people consider the groups like ICE and others to be radicalized. I've done enough studying of the Quran in the past 10 years when I got ready to go to Afghanistan my first time to say, what's the underlying problem of what's happening here? And it's not just Al-Qaeda and what happened on 9/11. It's actually what Islam is called to do. So much of the media and the president says that these groups are radicalized, and they don't acknowledge the real problem is that they're fundamentalists. Those are practicing as it was fundamentally meant to be practiced. If you're elected to Washington, would you consider changing the term and not say radicalized Muslim, but say fundamentalists, what it truly is?
And it's a
Would
fair
you
question.
consider that?
That's probably the best question anybody could ask me, because it goes into so many layers. We first are looking at our Constitution, I think, and that's not very inspiring on that question, because it gives way too many protections for what you're talking about. But then all lawyers, when they look at a law, they'll look at the legislative intent. I'm fascinated by the founding fathers and what they wrote before they made the Constitution. And so many of the founding fathers wanted in our Constitution that we would be a Christian religion. There's a reason if you go to the Congress, Moses is looking at the speaker. And that God was in the framers. And George Washington says, our reason and our experience tell us we must have a government based on religious principle. Not religion, but religious principle, that the Christian religion, you're supposed to do well. All the things that we're taught as Christians. There was great debate on whether it should include others. And the reason I think it should, if you don't know, and you probably do, Islam is not the Presbyterians or the Baptists it is a way of life. And if you're a fundamentalist, it's just this book. It's just these pillars. It rejects government. It rejects political parties. Saddam Hussein was the enemy of Al-Qaeda. He wore a business suit. You can't do that under the Quran. The Quran doesn't distinguish between men and women, but you're not supposed to show the accoutrements. Most of the women have to do differently than the men, but the Quran doesn't distinguish. The Quran, Saddam Hussein smoked cigars, drank Johnny Walker Blue. He was all the things that are against fundamental Islam. That's one side of it. The other side of it, where half of my family is in West Virginia, we still have primitive Baptists. If you stick your hand in the snakes and you get bit and die, well, you just didn't have the faith. But I wouldn't, I mean, the government goes in there and tries, because the Supreme Court says, I can't regulate your belief, but I can regulate your practice. Had a famous case now in Miami with the Haitians and the chickens. Your practice is sticking that hand in, we can come in there and if the snakes are biting. So where I'm trying to go with that is, I'm not comfortable, whether it's in Afghanistan or what I saw in Iraq, by having this kind of open the doors and let people in under freedom of religion. That's to me the same thing as saying, let's not lock our doors when we leave our house. It's folly, and I can go deeper, probably the same way you can. How many did we train that ended up shooting us? How do you distinguish between that? Another part of me with my Christian religion says, you must judge people one at a time. I know whenever I have judged people by groups, by gender, by race, by ethnicity, I have failed. I have made a mistake, but I'm not sure I want to judge this group one at a time. And it's your point. And, you know, I got to tell you, what we have to do, in my opinion, is a reasonable approach. I'm not ready to say, let's judge one at a time, because that seems like what we've been doing, and in our own country, the consequence. So, again, if I had the better information, I think I could come up with a policy that still respects Americana, and I don't mean just the law, I mean what we stand for as Americans, but keeps us protected. I was never comfortable in Iraq. I was never comfortable in Afghanistan. Even at Bagram, which was the safest place there, things could happen to you. Yeah, and even then there was no safe place. Because if you saw one of these people behind you, you just couldn't be comfortable, at least I couldn't. And I don't know how many American kids have been killed training these people. So it's a great point, but I'm going to add one thing to your comment. And this is what I would do if you elected me. We're going to get out of the business of training freedom fighters and then fighting them the next year. Remember this guy named Osama bin Laden that was on our payroll for about 10 years? Because he was a freedom fighter with the Northern Alliance up in the northern part of Afghanistan. Well, that didn't work out so well for us. And then there was this guy, Saddam Hussein. Rumsfeld's shaking his hand all during the 80s because he's our balance to the Ayatollah over in Iran. That didn't work out so well. If you buy a thug, you can't be surprised when the thug stays a thug when you get outbid next time. The people we trained in Iraq, what did we, I mean, again, going back to your point, I don't have the numbers, but I'm told we spent up to $500 million to field 8 guys that went to the other side, I mean, that probably isn't right, but the sentiment is right. Okay, how many military men in this? Just a lot. How many major wars have we won since we stopped declaring and approved the Constitution?
None.
0.
We beat Grenada.
And that General Schwarzkopf, in his book, It Doesn't Take a Hero on Desert Storm, says it's dangerous to have any lessons learned in this war. Because there was 134 combat dead, there was like 235 total dead. 660,000 plus Americans liberated Kuwait which is about the size of an average Texas county. 12 years later, 160,000 men and women are standing on the border to invade a country that's the size of San Francisco to LA with 160,000 people. And why did General Shinseki get fired? Because he said, I need 400,000 soldiers for this. Not for the war, but for the peace. And where did the wheels come off in Iraq? Not in 2003, but in 2004, 5, and 6. You know, the battles of Fallujah, Ramadi, and all those things. So a combination of a better policy, and Xenophon or somebody back in Greece said, armies don't fight wars, nations do. Who was fighting the war at the Punch Bowl and the DMZ in Korea? Who was fighting at Chosin Reservoir? Not the nation, the army was fighting, and in the Marines. Who was fighting the war at Khe Sanh?
Marines.
In Kwa Viet? In Tan Son Nhut? And I Corps up north was the Marines. But when you don't declare your wars, you don't get the foundation of the American people underneath them. John was back there flying missions in Vietnam. I know personally what he was doing. We talked about a certain movie actress that was participating in a way. If we read Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, powers of Congress declare war. Declare war. What the framers intended to do is to go to Congresswoman here and make her yes or no vote. So when she went back to her constituents, she had to say, I'm going to send your sons and daughters and your money to war. Well, you're going to kind of want to be convinced on what that is. But with the War Powers Act, she doesn't have to do that now. She passes a resolution making the president a king. Why? Because she can spend 30 years on Capitol Hill if she avoids leadership choices. Because the guy in the White House is leaving 4 to 8 years anyway. Does this sound familiar? Nixon's war? LBJ's war? Bush's war?
That's what the Powell Doctrine was supposed to fix for us.
And that went to some 60-day thing, and how has that worked out for us? Once you have established the fact that there is no accountability, because I'm guessing she may not want to come home with a weak case. And the framer said, no, go to the bright lights on the middle of the floor and make the case. And then somebody's going to go, but what about the cost before, during, and after? Are we considering that? What's the downside? All that debate doesn't happen now. And you have, does this sound familiar? I was before the war, before I was against it. And you can still be a Secretary of State getting away with that. So, no, yes or no, risk your political career because you're having PFCs that we served risking all their tomorrows on that vote. And they should have the American people underneath them, not politicians trying to avoid. You were first, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to let you know that I did send away for the package so that I might decide it. My wife gave me the approval, and like you, I have a vested interest now to run for Congress, which I guess that means I will be running against you.
Good. I love the process.
The thing that I really am perturbed about is what you're talking about means head-to-head information. When you get to Washington, from all the congressmen I talk to, none of it is important. We don't have the power. What happens is, when I looked at the last two continuing resolutions that went through, I really looked at what went through at the end, what was snuck through, and to me, I don't know, who do you consider the most powerful man in America?
Probably the Fed chairman.
Fed chairman is very powerful. I'm thinking K Street Cabal is the most, and as you know, there's former Speaker of the House there's a whole bunch of people, and everything that they wanted, every single thing that they wanted to get through in the last two continuing resolutions that were pushed through for the year was pushed through. So everybody who wanted a tax break, who had thoroughbred horses, all this other stuff, that all got through. So to me, you know, we're a congressman, you go up there, you try to do your best, but there's a whole bunch of things that are almost outside of our control. And I looked through and I wanted to know who the most powerful people were in America, and then what can I do to try to represent people against the most powerful people. And and it's the donor class, it's the Chamber of Commerce, it's the K Street cabal, or connivers, whatever you want to call them, it's SEIU and AFL, you know, and to me, the other thing is, when you were talking about the VA, the biggest joke is on America, the senators and congressmen all act like they're really angry, and we say, we want these people fired. Well, nobody gets fired. They get demoted, and they sometimes even get a raise when they get demoted. The reason is because we don't have any control over civil service. There was no civil service reform. Without civil service reform, nothing's going to happen. And I know too many people in the VA who work their tails off to help the veterans, and there's about 6% of the people who come in and they watch porno, they do this, they do that, and they're making $60,000 a year when they're not making overtime, which maybe pushes them up to $90,000 a year. And those people have to be gotten rid of. And so whenever you see a congressman or the senators like, okay, so, oh, this is terrible, we got to get rid of these people. Nothing happens to those people. Not one of those people with the IRS, none of them have ever been fired. They've been demoted, they go on administrative leave at $160,000 a year, things like that. Without civil service reform, nothing's ever going to happen. So there's 5 or 6 issues. I'd be happy to talk to you about them later on, but all I know is when Dick Gephardt and all his boys come to Capitol Hill, every single thing that they want gets through on those budget deals. Nothing that would benefit us, like a lower tax bill, something to help all working people, something to bring back jobs, none of that gets through. And that's what really infuriates me.
Well, let me
That's why I
comment
was
on your point. Madison tells us that a government deserves, a people deserve the government they elect or tolerate. There's a reason that Congress has a 13% approval rating, and congressmen and women have a 90%. Collectively, why is the reason that there's no accountability? Because you don't ever want to listen to what a politician says, the hyperbole that you're talking about. You want to listen to what they do. Most Americans want to control the debt. It's not happening. Most Americans want to secure the borders. It's not happening. Most Americans have this whole agenda, but it doesn't connect because there's this feeling of powerlessness. But really, Jefferson was not a framer. He was minister to Paris, but he always said this. His fingerprints are all over the Constitution, is what the academic said. The first 3 words of the preamble will always tell you where the blame for bad government attaches. And all those things that you listed, and you could have listed more.
Oh, I
You left out a big one.
Yeah,
You know you did. You left out a really big one. That is the reason both parties hate Trump. Because when he says, I don't need your money and you can't stand it, that's what he's talking about. He does not have to play by the rules. Now, I'm not inside the castle, but I am telling you, the scenario you're talking about isn't the politicians. They're snake oil people for forever with us. It's us. Because we're not holding accountable, because every one of those cabinet executive agencies gets an oversight committee in the House and the Senate. They fund it. And that's one of the things I'm disappointed in, because hiring 200 new agents in the latest gun deal, I want to know about that, because the Constitution is clear as English can be written that only the House can appropriate money. So where does that come from? Why do we not see what you're getting? It isn't the politicians. It's us. It's the American people. We're not. They made the lower house run every 2 years for a reason. They're spending your money. And what does every congressman tell you? I hate to have to campaign. Well, that's what the framers wanted, because they're spending our money. And the framers said, put that person on a short choke chain. Does anybody know in here where accountability stopped on spending money? I'll give you a hint. It was in 1913. What amendment was that? And that amendment was Sweet 16. That's right, sir. And that's the amendment for the first 124 years of this republic. If there wasn't enough money, Article 1, the president submits the budget. Article 2, the president submits the budget's responsibility. Article 1, they spend it. Customs and tariffs would get money, excise taxes. If there was not enough money to print money, provide for commandants, Navy, Army, and all that, prior to the 16th Amendment, does this sound familiar? Apportioned into guess how many pieces? 435. So guess what our congresswoman brought home to her constituents for 124 years? A bill. The 16th Amendment is one of the shortest amendments. Says that Congress has the power to tax without regard to apportionment. Guess what? She's not accountable anymore for her vote. She can point to the Republicans and the Democrats. Have you ever been in a homeowners association? Well, it's a cottage industry here in Florida. If there's 100 houses and you're putting in street lights and 100,000, you have the process, and then they apportion it into the cost. And here's the resident expert, Jim. You pay, and you'll notice if you read your frame constitution, there's not one word in it on how you're going to pay. They didn't care for the same reason the homeowners doesn't care. Jim's rich, he's going to pay with his gold mine. You know, someone else might pay with old money. Someone else is running a grocery store. The framers didn't care. That was up to the legislature of New York or Pennsylvania or North Carolina. And how people paid, there was no IRS. There's old people in America alive today, very old, didn't have an IRS, didn't have an income tax. Imagine that. The Great White Fleet went around the world in 1906, 16 battleships, 22,000 sailors. You need some money to do that. You know, the government can work when it's inside. But I hope you run because I believe in the process and I believe the conversation we're having. I disagree with you, and that's the good part of it. That's what Jefferson said. The point of debate was to convince and be convinced and learn and get smarter. I didn't read the Constitution until I was 40 years old. I say that to my shame. But as the Reverend would tell us, many converts are more devout than non-converts. I'm one of them. So I'm excited. I hope you run, and only good things can happen when more people get in the conversation.
We had one more question.
Oh.
There was one more. Oh.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
General, pick any one of the issues. It could be one of the ones this gentleman said, or pick any one that you want, a national issue that a U.S. congressional seat would deal with, and just say what you see is the state of it, what you would do about it, what you change it, what you pick one specific one that's that's up on the books right now. Doesn't have to be a law, but one of the specific policies that are up. It could be with the budget, it could be with foreign defense, it could be with the military, it could be with illegal immigration. You pick one and say specifically how you would oppose it, support it, change it.
Simple for me, sir. The greatest security threat to this republic is the debt. Because everything connects to it. Everything you said, a strong military connects to that. Remember, the discretionary part of the budget. If you looked at the pie for the first 140 years, everything that's not defense was like this. And the Army and the Navy was almost everything. If you look at it now, you're going to see about 17%. Because the pie now is almost, and this is what they say on Capitol Hill, the discretionary part of the budget is only the defense. So guess what gets pressed? I'll point to border. The Democrats want the votes, and the Republicans want the cheap labor. That's why we're sitting here in this food fight, where we're all feeling powerless and we all know what we want, but it doesn't happen. We have elected people. It's our blame. We have the wrong people representing us that aren't doing what this gentleman said over here, is getting down and making a point. Because I'm told, and this is hearsay, and if any lawyers are here, you know what that means, that what happens is you're a new congressman and you get to sit down in front of, and I don't know what I'm talking about, you get to sit down in front of people like Boehner and Ryan and McConnell, and they go, so we're thinking about your committee. Well, you think you're a retired major in the Army. You'd probably like to be on the budgeting committee of military, armed services, whatever. We want to know how you're going to vote on Obamacare or the border. And you say, well, you know, well, we got an opening in fisheries for the hatchery in Montana. And I'll say, I'm in the Marine Corps. You cannot call artillery in your own position unless you submit it in writing. That's a rule in the Marine Corps. That if I'm getting overrun and I need my own artillery on me, I have to submit it in writing. Well, it's not that convenient to say, excuse me, I got to go back to where the guns are 6 miles away. And the point is, somebody tells me that, I'm going to say, well, you know, you don't mind putting that in writing, that unless I fold on that, you don't mind that, do you? That would be my reaction. And they go, well, I'm not going to put that in writing. Well, I'm going to the 6 o'clock news. Maybe I'm a one-term congressman. You know, if you can take my job and do a better job than me, I would gladly go do something else. The framers could not envision a career politician. For the same reason, you can't envision somebody wanting to run a homeowners association, although a lot of people do. You know, and Franklin, you know, he was at the convention and he was almost dead, but he drew delegates. And he's famous for saying, if you have a taste for law or sausage, it's best seen neither made. Jim and I watched an amendment last night, and it reminded me of law and sausage, that how ugly that got. You know, I mean, not ugly, but the process. It's Congress, which means it's us, we the people, we get what we deserve in the end. And how much of our liberty have we exchanged for our entitlements? And how much do we... When Vespasian was building the Colosseum, his son said, supposedly, Dad, why are you building the Colosseum? And his son actually finished it when Vespasian died. And Vespasian, you never know, everything's apocryphal when it comes from the ancients, but he said, son, if you can feed and entertain the mob, they don't care about corruption in their government. Are we there? Remember a few years ago where the Terry Schiavo, the Congress that can't declare war, convened to decide on a feeding tube? In baseball and steroids? Are you kidding me? So is it food, is it bread and circuses? Right? Is our entertainment more important than our army? I mean, I'm saying this is rhetorically, but I'm worried.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you for waiting. Is that all right? Thank you.
Our guest speaker hasn't showed up, so where did we go?
My name is Al.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not running against you. My question to you is this. The senators and representatives, how do you feel about term limits?
Term question. I didn't put him up to this, but I would have if I knew you'd ask that. I'm sorry, yeah. Term limits and senators.
And representative.
Well, it's where he's, let me answer something very, very, very important. What was the amendment after the tax amendment that did away with the Senate? Pay the lady. You got it. And before I answer that, let me tell you what the 17th Amendment did for those that don't know. 3 things happened in 1913. The 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not federal, has no reserves, and isn't a bank, which is all that happened. And it's connected back to your point, sir, on who the power brokers in this country can be. Prior to the 17th Amendment, from 1789 to 1913, 1914, the Senate was elected by who? The state representatives. This is 155 men and women that are all mostly businessmen and women. It's fascinating. You're a senator now, man. I'm down here wanting bread and circuses. I want free tuition. I want the whole thing. Madison tells us, Father of the Constitution, that the corruption of the mob in the lower house will be checked at the door of the Senate. Because you're going to be there for 6 years, and your accountability is to these men and women that know there isn't a free lunch. And you're going to say, you were really like an ambassador from the States, because there never would have been a United States, because Rhode Island wouldn't have joined anything with New York. The Senate made the Republic. And the Senate was going to keep, because your political accountability had nothing to do with the fact that I didn't get all the things I wanted. And you would have said, you know what, the 9th and 10th Amendment speaks to what you want. Go to your state legislature, and good luck. Because Jim didn't have a printing press in Tallahassee. And the year I ran, the governor's budget was $98 billion, and the legislature was $2 billion different. I mean, minuscule differences compared to the federal budget, because they have to live kind of like we do at home. Only the government can print money. So going back, I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. I'm a little animated, as you know. I'm against term limits. That's going to surprise most people in this room. But why? Because we have them already every 2 years if we're paying attention. I do not want to, ma'am?
absolutely right, I'm the term limit.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I do not want a lame duck representative, because you want to know what damage is. If you're a nefarious person that doesn't have high morals, and you know you're a second-term senator or a third-term representative, you can do all sorts of perfidy, because what do you have to lose? I don't want to get rid of a good person because the time's old, and I don't want to keep a bad person. If I'm paying attention, it's hard to do your civic duty. It's hard to pay attention and do the things. Everybody in this room is sitting here for a reason. I salute you. But if we don't do that, the fact that if we're paying attention, we have term limits now, I think we further disconnect people from their civic duties. Because how many of us would do this? Oh, how bad can it get? There's term limits. Whoa, much worse than you can ever imagine. For the same reason I don't want to keep a bad person, I don't want to get rid of a good person. Because if they're doing the job, keep going.
Unfortunately, most of them haven't been doing the job.
Okay, but let's ask why that is.
Because we haven't been paying attention.
I disagree, sir. That you're right, but why is that? Let's take the engineer, the problem solvers. They go back and that's why engineers are so good at a lot of things, because they look at a problem and they dissect it and they attack it from its elements. The reason you're right is because the founding fathers, guess how much in the Constitution is on who can vote? That's right, not one word. All that had to come out of the state legislatures. All 13 original colonies that became states all tied it to taxpayer. So the reason a lot of us aren't paying attention is because how different would my speech be if I was just talking to taxpayers? It'd be somewhat different. How different is your speech going to be running for Senate when your whole group is 155 businessmen and women? It's going to be different. The fact that you do not have an enfranchisement hurdle to get over, and what modern liberal Hollywood pillories is a vestige of terrible conditions, isn't really accurate, because we forget in old Europe, you didn't become a landowner if you weren't born into it. Your son was a blacksmith if you were a blacksmith. The American dream was an opportunity to change your station. To become a landowner, that's how we paid our Revolutionary soldiers. That was such a monumental step that we can't even grasp it now, in my opinion, what it meant to be to become a landowner, because all 13 types of landowning, if you own land, so it was looked at as an incentive to become somebody, to become a landowner. We've lost that here in our modern society, because we don't, I'll live in an apartment, I'll buy a house. No, to become a landowner and a taxpayer, because I ask you this, who is more connected to their community? A transient? A person that lives in an apartment? Or a person that owns their residence? Of course. And that was meant to become an incentive for people to get into the system. Now it's kind of pillory. And in fairness, it wouldn't be fair if we didn't say that some of the state legislatures were enacting laws that under the 14th Amendment, the federal government, which our Bill of Rights was supposed to be a shield against the federal government, comes in now as a sword with the 14th Amendment, if anybody knows what that means. Now, the federal government is now the enforcement arm through the 14th Amendment powers. We can talk about that all day, because none of the southern states voted on the Civil War amendments. So I say that we're where we are. You're right, we're at this place where people aren't paying attention, but many of the people that are now enfranchised wouldn't be voters under the framers. So, that's a different topic. Now, what is it? Non-felon. And that's under attack. Everybody can vote. Is it okay? Okay.
One quick.
Yes, sir.
You're also an attorney.
Would
What
you
tort
stand up,
reform?
please?
Hold on. Her name is Lee Vincent, Pinellas County leader for Ben Carson.
You know I was going to like that.
The tort reform. What is your thinking on that, and why has there been no discussion of it as far as I can see?
Good question. Tort reform. What is torts? The art of making something out of nothing is the way I feel about it. And it's a great career field for civil liability. The reason I don't get too wrapped around the axle in tort reform, because you can't come to court without a cause of action the state legislature gave you. I think the remedy there is in the state. I think it's closer to home, at least on the state level, that you have to come to court with a claimant tort that's supported by statute. It's a little like the Kelo decision in Connecticut that everybody knows about, the Fifth Amendment taking private property for private use. You're going to shoot me this, but I think the decision was a little right because the media got it wrong. What was being said in that Supreme Court decision is the point of the federal government isn't to save you from your state legislature. And it was the state legislature of Connecticut that said take private property for private use. And finally, the pendulum in federal cases goes back and forth. Finally, the federal government, and I think to their credit, was saying, we can't rescue you from your state legislature. And if you study the Kelo case, and everybody's familiar with that, Susan Kelo, her property was condemned for private use. It had happened in Hawaii as well. But the case law, believe it or not, judges frequently have to hold their nose when they make a decision. But they're screaming to the legislature, and since that, the legislature has absolutely remedied. That property still, to this day, hasn't been used for taking. So sometimes the federal government isn't the answer. And all I'm saying now is if we don't like our tort law in Florida, not Jim now, but Jim before, and whoever, but that is our remedy. I do not see a federal role there. And that's kind of the problem. Everybody's spring-loaded to what the federal government needs to. Not unless it's one of those enumerated powers. Do you know that there was no federal prisons until Prohibition because there wasn't enough federal crime to break? If my area of law is Admiralty and Maritime, Article 3, Section 2, the only area of law the framers gave entirely to the federal government. And there was a good reason for that because the state of New Hampshire could not have regulated ships going in and out of Charleston and Boston. You can see a point of the federal government. It's always those things that a state legislature can't do. So Admiralty and Maritime, everybody know what a recorder is. If you look in law offices, they look like encyclopedias, and people don't use them now, it's all online, but if you pull one out, for the first 30, 40 years of the United States, pulled out a recorder, half the cases were counterfeit and pirate. Because that's about the only federal law there was to break. That's about all the Supreme Court did. That's why Marbury versus Madison. I could go on and on, but the answer for me for tort is here. And if we don't like it, we have our remedy through our political process with political accountability. Yes, sir?
Actually, she has a question.
Please.
My name is Sharon Smith. A lot of the things that you've been discussing this evening, and the questions you've been answering, I've really enjoyed this a lot. This gentleman over here, you really answered his question. It seems to me that a lot of the issues that you've been discussing could be remedied by the adoption of a fair tax. Have you read the legislation? Are you familiar with what would happen if the fair tax was adopted?
Yes. I didn't pay her to give that question, but I would have if it had been legal. Hear me out on this before you dagger me. I am against any discussion on tax collection unless it connects to money spending. Because what I think tyrants do, especially the socialist dogma, is they set us against each other. Well, you're rich and you're only paying that and you're not paying anything. And the next thing you know, we're doing the heavy lifting on the foundation of Marxism is class envy. So however you come up with sales tax, value-added tax, 10% tax, whatever the scheme is, if it doesn't connect back to spending, to me, it's a shell game for accountants and everyone else. The spending is the key. My position is, why don't we do what worked for 124 years as an operation of law? I've been through that already because I don't think we need an IRS. I'd say we should take the apportion to the states. What do we have, 27? Is it 27 white folks here in Florida? 27 435th is our job to pay. I don't see a necessity for the IRS to go through our laundry to find out how much we should pay. And the reason I'm against any scheme is because it's a detail. Same as the homeowners, different people will pay different way. Nebraska's probably going to have a tax on corn to pay their share. We're probably going to stick it to the tourists again. You know, it's our problem to figure out. Now, What you're talking about to me comes to the top of the list on the how we're going to do it. But until we get hold of the spending side of the equation, which is what the framework, why did they have the Constitutional Convention in 1787? The Articles of Confederation had been written in 1783 at the end of the Revolution. They were bankrupt. And remember, they first met to modify the Articles, and they decided to throw them out the window and start over. It was because they needed to get money, and they knew if they didn't tie accountability to the spending, and again, now we're talking about 2 years. You can't, remember, a congressman is only 1 year away from re-election median. The median time is 1 year. Sometimes it's 2 and sometimes it's 1 day, but 1 year is because they wanted us to watch the spending. To come back to your point, I'm completely open to every way of collecting the tax, but that will go to the state legislature and a political process, and there's a lot of ideas.
That's the thing, is you pay a tax, because it would come out of the states.
Yes, and that's the venue for it. I don't see a role for the federal government in collecting our taxes. This country was founded by tax rebellion. And remember the Boston Tea Party was a 2% tax.
2 cents, that's right.
Tea was cheaper in Boston than it was in London. And if you really peel the onion back a little, the British kind of had a claim. The French and Indians were still out on the frontiers. There was a cost to protecting. I found out in a bar in Manchester, a restaurant establishment in Manchester from 3 British guys, how the British won the American Revolution.
No?
Yeah, that was my reaction. I ordered up another bit of refreshment. And they basically told me, only Lord North lost his job out of this. They streamlined 25,000 redcoats and all the costs, and they kept their economic interest. All through it, they said they really won that. And judging from the economy, there was a strong argument that they did. Cornwallis went on to a great military career. Nobody really got harmed in that. They kept their interest, which is why the Portuguese in Spain left, because their empire was based on be all you can get. You go get it, bring it home, and retire. The British had that. Benjamin Franklin and his son, they never reconciled. They stayed estranged their whole life. Fascinating stuff in our history.
I just have an ending to say to you, please do us a favor and beat Charlie.
I'll need your help, ma'am. I'm here trying to, whoever.
Because I was his former campaign. Yeah.
Yes, sir?
H-1B.
Yes.
I am an engineer. There's a destructive myth that's been perpetrated by the Chamber of Commerce and other K Street people and whatnot about the glut, alleged glut of technical workers, computer programmers, engineers, and all of that. And it's absurd. I just want to make a point. I don't know what your response is going to be. There's about 190 million Americans right now that are not working. I know scores of engineers who, like me, went 10 years of high school, to get a bachelor's and master's in computer education. You know what I'm talking about. And they can't find a job. Because if you look at the healthcare businesses around here, there's a lot of them, in the area. H2B, H1B. Our children, I've got 4 kids, okay? If this was the 80s, they'd be making twice as much as they are now. They'd be owning houses. But you can't even get an entry-level job anymore because you go to a McDonald's or a Wendy's or wherever it is, and it's full of illegals. We've got to stop this or we're going to lose the country. And that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think I alluded a little to that.
To his point though,
Okay,
in
yes, ma'am.
corporations in the banking system and all of those systems, they're supposed to be hiring Americans first before bringing the H-1Bs in. They're not. They're filling American jobs that are supposed to be open with the Indians and people from Manila and then other areas, but mostly people bring them in from India. They're calling them jobs filled for Americans. And there are direct orders within these corporations that say, tear up your resumes.
I think it goes to this gentleman's point. that-
Well, it goes to the point like Disney fired 300 Americans
There you go.
and gave the jobs to
But-
lower paid.
But it still comes back to us that we're not holding our representative accountable on that point, because what bothers me the most on immigration is this kind of nebulous, well, it's not the American dream or something. And I go, well, 1840, that was different. 1910, when we had, when there was 40 million people in the country, and maybe there was a time, but your point says it all. With the situation we have now, don't we have to revisit our whole immigration? I'm not even talking about the security piece. The security piece is a separate stovepipe by itself. Immigrants aren't bringing highways, schools, water. I'm not sure that we even need more people.
But every time you open
Now we're having a conversation back and forth. No, that's okay.
It's my fault.
No, it's not. Mr. Dudley will have the last question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can you stand?
Well, my name's Fred Dudley. All these points are well taken, but there's another side of the coin. So many people today think that the bulk of employment is by major companies. This is a country full of small businesses, and I would venture to say that at least 60% of the public that is employed by small businesses. Although larger businesses quite often have these programs in place, there's a lot of these people that are not working and are working at low wage because they're being hired by small companies. So it's not just big companies that are doing this. That's all my point.
I think 60% is a very accurate estimate of who the people who work. I'm for the free market in that sense. I think it's a better solution than any government mandate. I mean, we can go on about minimum wage or anything else, but let's remember one thing fundamental. The whole point of our federal government is for business. That if you see all the enumerated powers, the only reason there was needed to be a currency was for business. The only reason you needed an army is so that you're not going to plant ground if you think it's going to be invaded. You needed foreign policy to protect your foreign markets. Everything has a direct line back to business, large or small. And it's fascinating to me that as Madison was running from the burning White House, he wrote a letter that says, we knew this would happen because this was 1814, and that men and women of liberty are going to be so successful in their merchant and farms, they're not going to want to suffer the privations of military service. It was a generation later, and sure enough, they had no army. It's the reason Jefferson, and he said, pauper hirelings can never beat free men and women. Because East End London redcoats, they had nothing to go back to. But the citizen soldier, they had that business you're talking about, and it's the same thing today, whether you are, some people don't even have an employee. They just have their own business. Some people have one employee or two or 10 or whatever, but small business. That free men and women of liberty want to go back and work hard and change their station and have something to, it's the difference between, who doesn't work harder if they think they're going to be rewarded in a way that's going to advance them. It's kind of human nature. It's the reason the Soviet Union, here's 5 words you're never going to hear in your life. I'll say that right now as a politician. My imported Russian car. It's because if you build 6 cars that week and you build 5 last year, your new quota is going to be 6 under that system. Where what you're talking about here in America, we can be rewarded by hard work. And I spent some time in Poland, and the joke in the old Soviet Union was if we're farmers and you have a cow, and in America, I want to get my own cow, or maybe 2. If I'm in Russia, I hope your cow dies. That's kind of this socialism rations misery. And that's why I love what Dr. Carson says about healthcare. All you need is a patient and a medical facility. And to have the courage to stand up at a prayer breakfast in front of the president and tell him his baby was ugly, which is what he did, I was a follower there just from the courage of it, but I'm with you. That's the person I'm going to be thinking about when I represent, because soup to nuts, if I keep that person in the middle, that hard worker that's here, and I can isolate the special interests and hold them accountable and maybe expose, the oath is real simple. Everything that I will represent, if I can make there, is going to do one of 3 things. It's either going to help the people of CD13, not affect or hurt. It's pretty simple that way. And that's all I'm going to care about. And I mean, you said it very well, sir, you know, you really did, that if we get the train off the tracks and some other agenda that's not in the oath, it's where we are, in my opinion. Thank you. Thank you for the 2 minutes.